So what we're going to talk about today is chapter 26, the rise of trade in towns. And this is obviously an important period where basically the development of towns instead of feudal society and the manor being the center of life. So now, increasing population in the Middle Ages, that led to more towns being developed because you needed more place for more people to live. Now, more food due to better farming techniques that allowed people to actually get together and work in towns, because basically people didn't have to be farming all the time. And they also wanted to continue the trade with the Near East, and that's important because when that happens, you need a place where you can sell your goods. So some trading centers in particular. The important trading centers are located on sea routes. Now Venice, this is a picture of Venice over here. Venice is an island port located in modern Italy, and it used the ocean since it didn't have fertile land for crops, and still looks very cool today from what I understand. It became a leading port and a full-time merchant area for basically all of Europe. Now, it focused on trade with the Near East because it was around the Mediterranean, and with the removal of the threat of the Muslims in the South Mediterranean Sea, this led to increased trade because the people in the South Mediterranean, they were not attacking the North anymore. Now, as they expanded, cities continued to pop up along the Mediterranean, not just Venice, but other places too. Venice was the first one to go. Now Flanders, that's an area, and yeah, that's Ned Flanders, but we're not really worried about Ned. We're actually worried about this area, Flanders. And that area there is an area that's pretty close here to England, and it was famous for its wool, and it dominated the northern European trade routes. Traded a lot with England, as you can kind of understand. Now this is the country of Belgium together, Flanders and Wallonia, and you put them together and you got Belgium. Now merchants, as land routes grew as well as sea routes, and merchants traveled together for safety, and this led to the development of fairs. Now this is when they stopped at different places, and they became fairs, not stooped, but stopped. And they became regular events where merchants sold goods. They moved from a system of from bartering to exchanging metals and metals for goods, because after the fall of the Roman Empire, things kind of went back to the whole bartering thing. And this led to banks, which are used to develop to trade in coinage and be able to measure how much the coins are actually worth. Now, the growth of towns, merchants began to stay in one place, and these places became towns. People settled by the merchants since they built walls and moats for security. Cities called burgs, and that's the name of a castle that a town often grew by in Germany. That's why you get a lot of things like Hamburg and Strasbourg and things like that in Germany. And gradually, more people moved to towns, and they became the center of life, not the manor, like in the earlier part of the late Middle Ages. In terms of living conditions, the towns were rich enough to have stone walls, so good for protection, but the towns were also very crowded and did not have closed sewers, so pretty nasty and messy. Open sewers led to rats, and rats transmitted a plague called the Black Death. The Black Death killed much of the population, came up with some majorly crazy cures or a way of protecting themselves, but that did not work out too well, since about a third of the population of Europe died. And that led to a crisis in terms of the need of farmers, because once a lot of the serfs died, then all of a sudden you had problems with that. And some people tried to escape by leaving the towns. Now, in terms of the life of the people who were burghers, they were the rich merchants. They paid to have products made in the country and then sold them in towns for a profit. It's just basically a way of doing it because it was cheaper labor in the country. Some burghers were religious, they ate well, and they had servants as well. Now eventually things started to change. Due to feudalism, the land the towns were built on was owned by the nobles. And that noble charged the townspeople and charged the burghers a fee for the market. You can kind of understand how this is not going to end well. The nobles in the church were concerned about the power of the burghers and tried to keep them in their place, but the burghers, they tried to get more power and became loyal to a town instead of loyal to the noble who owned it. So yeah, not a good system. On some level, this was just the eventual development of modern society playing out here. Now, a commune was a political group of townspeople who worked against the bishops and the nobles and tried to govern themselves. That's where we get the root word for communism as well, but in this case, this is much earlier than that. Some areas got charters, which are documents allowing the town to run its own affairs. They were issued, and this allowed for some elections and independence. Now, towns with the charters started to develop their own laws and sometimes punished people pretty severely. They just wanted to make sure things were kept under control. Now, the rise of guilds in around 1100s, business groups called guilds, they tried to go ahead and develop a system by which a certain trade was organized. And what they did was they made it so that no one could do something like be a blacksmith unless they were a member of the guild. The guilds controlled an entire area, entire trade in a town. So they determined the rates of pay. They made sure there was quality work, that people weren't doing shoddy work. They took care of the sick members, and they were also social clubs as well. To become a member of a guild, a person had to be an apprentice to a master who was an expert. An apprentice is a trainee, a master is obviously an expert for about 2 to 7 years, depending upon what the actual trade was. Then they became a journeyman, a person who worked under a master for a daily wage, and so that's kind of the mid-step. And later they had to pass a test on their craft to be a master, and this is where we get the term masterpiece from. Masters could sell their own goods. Some people felt guilds, though, restricted trades because if there were too many, again, the guilds didn't want too many people of a particular trade in a town, so they had a tendency to sort of make sure that people, because that would lead to prices being lowered, so they had a tendency to restrict that trade. Now, in terms of cultural changes, the rise of the power of the burghers and guilds and bankers led to a decline in the overall power of the nobles. And the people had more leisure time since they were richer. Towns were also able to give money to support the arts. Now, townspeople also wanted a strong central government, and they supported kings that were willing to do that, and this particular ones that were willing to do things like support charters.